Permissionless, the crypto industry's leading developer conference, is coming to Brooklyn this June 24th to the 26th, and this time Bitcoin is showing up in a big way. That's right, with confidence in Ethereum and Solana on the decline, interest in Bitcoin development is riding high, and yet the way forward for many builders remains unclear. Layer 2s, meta protocols, soft fork upgrades. We'll be talking about the future of Bitcoin and how and if it needs to change. Of course, tickets are going fast. You can get them today at blockworks.co. We'll see you there. Quick reminder, nothing said on Supply Shock is a recommendation to buy or sell any investment or product. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions, not financial advice or necessarily the views of Blockworks. Our hosts, guests, and the Blockworks team may hold positions in the company's funds or projects discussed.
GM, good morning. Welcome to the Milk Road Show, the daily crypto show for investors who check their portfolio more than you check your texts. I'm your host, Jay Hamilton. We're recording this live on Thursday, June 5th, but you might be watching this on Friday, June 6th, wherever you are, whatever day it is. We're so happy that you're here to join us today because we're going to be talking about the biggest bubble in crypto that people are starting to talk about, but not really talking about enough. We're going to dive into the IPO boom that's coming. We're going to talk about politics and US regulation, Bitcoin Vegas. We're going to get some takeaways from that. To talk through all this, we're joined by Pete Rizzo, known on X as the Bitcoin historian. He's also the host of a fellow podcast, Supply Shock. You guys should check it out. Awesome podcast. We'll link to it in the show notes. And he's really just an OG in the space who knows so much about Bitcoin and crypto and understands it, quite frankly, the way few people understand this tech and also understand the financial market side of this tech. Now, before we jump in, I got to let you guys know about a pro report that is dropping this Saturday. If you're not a pro member, just check it out. Read the first section. The first section is free, and then you can decide if you want to go pro. It's our monthly market pulse check where we take a look at what we think is going to come in the crypto markets for the month ahead, for June. And it's absolute fire. I just read it. You got to check it out. Before we jump into here from Rizzo, today's episode is brought to you by Ledin. Get cash without selling your Bitcoin. It's also brought to you by Definitive, the leading multi-chain trading terminal, trusted by funds, DAOs, and pro traders. Without further ado, Pete Rizzo, welcome to the Milk Road Show.
Happy to be here, Jay.
Pleasure to have you, my man. Pleasure. You got a great setup. I love the way you're sitting is so casual and just like a historian. You really live this Bitcoin historian
like dark,
persona.
Dimly lit settings. You know,
it's very nice. It's very nice. Yeah. Okay, you and I were chatting before recording that you have a thesis on how you think the next, we actually didn't set a time frame. I don't know if it's the rest of this year or if it's the next few years, how you think all of this could play out, which I realize is a very broad question to start an interview with. Try to give us a walkthrough of where you think we are now and the trajectory that we're going on. And you can focus on Bitcoin specifically to give you some parameters for this.
Yeah, sure. So brief introduction, Pete Rizzo, go by the Bitcoin historian. I've been a Bitcoin and cryptocurrency journalist since 2013. So this is going on my, fourth or fifth Bitcoin bubble cycle. So yeah, the good news, we're still in a bull market, right? No matter how boring it might be on the day-to-day, right? This happens. This is normal. But yeah, I think to your point, I think what you're seeing is that there are kind of larger macro factors at play in this Bitcoin and crypto bull cycle that are much different than we've seen before, right? Like earlier in Bitcoin's history, it was a more small insular community. We weren't really affected by regulation. We weren't really affected kind of by these larger things. Sometimes there was technical kind of innovations that propelled the industry forward. I think at this point, it's basically all about the regulation. I would be hard pressed to find that we're going to set a new all-time high prior to the market structure bill being passed in August. So if you're looking for kind of a prediction one, I think that, we're locked in a pretty solid range. Sell in May, go away. I think that's going to ring true. Don't think we're going to see a lot of activities until then, except in a couple places. One is in the IPO boom. Circle obviously going IPO today. pretty huge, overperforming, kind of up 2 or 3x.
It's up 3x right now since.
Yeah, and like Circle, not even not to be honest, in my opinion, like not I don't know, I wouldn't invest in Circle, right? Like not a company that I'm super excited about from a tech standpoint. But I think you're going to see every crypto and Bitcoin company go public, right? So I think this is just the start of the wave. The wave's going to be big. Stablecoin issue in America, probably not my favorite pick, but again, you're going to see winners of everybody's going to win, right? Everybody's going to go public. Everybody's going to win. It's going to be an exciting time. And the second one is the Bitcoin Treasury companies, right? Which we talked a little bit about. And my thesis is really, I think this is the one that the crypto industry is broadly just sleeping on pretty profoundly, right? So one of the things that you see in Bitcoin and crypto over time is that, sometimes there are these big mental model sea changes, right? Where something comes out and nobody thinks anything of it. And then it just gets super big, right? So stablecoins would actually be a great example of that. When I wrote my first article on stablecoins in 2014, I actually wrote the first story in CoinDesk about Tether, which was then kind of owned and operated by a whole different group of people, including the founder, Reeve Collins, and the principal investor, Brock Pierce. And broadly, everybody in the crypto industry thought this was very uninteresting. Like no one was interested in stablecoins at all. The kind of cries of derision were sort of, we're doing all this innovative stuff. Bitcoin at that time, it was fashionable to consider Bitcoin more boring. And, there was a feeling in the industry we're moving past that. And so stablecoins were just looked at as this, weird kind of redheaded stepchild of the industry that just like nobody thought was interesting, right? And I think you look at the history of Bitcoin and you see a lot of these ideas that are sort of just like unilaterally dismissed. You see a lot of ideas that are kind of just embraced, by the monoculture of whatever kind of crypto group, and those tend to be broadly oversold. And what's interesting is you can kind of go back and you look at the real sleepers. The real sleepers seem to be the ones that like everybody hates on, right? It was very fashionable to hate on stablecoins, just like it was fashionable to hate on NFTs, just like it was fashionable to hate on Bitcoin treasury companies. And you really look at it, right? You think of how long has Saylor been doing the strategy. Saylor's been on his own, going in his own direction, acquiring 600,000 Bitcoin, asterisk, almost there, including his personal holdings. He's over 600,000. For 5 years, and nobody has followed him in this direction. And I think you're about to see a stampede in that direction precisely for that reason, right? Nobody thought it was interesting for a public company to buy and hold Bitcoin, and now there's this whole kind of movement. And I was saying it on the live stream at Bitcoin Vegas. It's Saylor mania. Like when Saylor goes someplace, he's flocked by this chorus of kind of Wall Street veterans, young kids. I mean, he really has become, the Saylor mania is a reference to kind of Beatlemania. I mean, he's the new rock star in finance. And so what do Bitcoin treasury companies offer? One, they're essentially opening up Bitcoin exposure to older investors, right? Because essentially I kind of wrote in Bitcoin Magazine at the end of last year when it really kind of clicked for me what Saylor's thesis was in terms of getting companies to hold Bitcoin, which was essentially that, what do people like about the cryptocurrency market beyond Bitcoin? There's a lot of talk about that we like the technology and you like the features, and sure, there's some hardcore folks who are really in it for that. But I would say a good 80 to 90% of trading in the cryptocurrency markets is just speculation on random tickers and symbols that people like. And so what does the Bitcoin treasury model unlock? Well, you have boomer ICOs. Essentially instead of a 3-letter ticker, you have a 4-letter ticker, and instead of an unregulated marketplace, now you're in a regulated marketplace. So if you think about an environment where market structure is really protracted, that doesn't pass for 3 or 4 months, doesn't pass for 6 months. Where does capital flow in the industry that's regulated? Where these regulated companies that are buying and holding Bitcoin, a la MicroStrategy, start to look really attractive. And that's why you're seeing people go jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And the arbitrage there is really on the regulation, right? It was really the second and third wave copycats, that have really proven this model out, which is Metaplanet in Japan, the Blockchain Group in France, which were both the best performing stocks of like the last year, up by thousands and thousands of percent. Right. So I think you're going to see just a massive, upswing in that and capital deployed there just in every regional globe. And what does that look like? I really think this is a CoinMarketCap type moment. And for people who don't have the historical context. Yeah, I was going to dive in and say, quickly, like CoinMarketCap really, was an overnight success in the crypto industry, right? So from 2013 to 2016, the focus, even in Silicon Valley, was Bitcoin, right? And it was popular from even like your Balaji's, your Mark Andreessens. It was, Bitcoin has the network effect. Bitcoin is going to win. And then all of a sudden in 2017, Ethereum takes off, really runs away, and it became everything's out replacing Bitcoin. Bitcoin's old tech. And the big winner in that transition on the data side was CoinMarketCap, which was the only company that really listed just the pricing data of the long tail of coins, right? So most of the other crypto media websites, they would just have the price of Bitcoin. CoinMarketCap, included, back then it was coins like 1 through 100, and by the end of the year it was 1 through 1,000. I think you're going to see that type of step increase. You're going to see thousands and thousands of Bitcoin treasury companies.
I think we're going to see thousands.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
You're already seeing it right now. I think there are multiple in different jurisdictions that are coming out. I think in the last week you've seen 3 or 4 that are going to launch in Sweden. These are competitive. If that happens jurisdiction by jurisdiction, yeah, I think it's going to be big, right? And what does it look like? It looks like the website that you visited every day, Bitcoin Treasuries, and you kind of think is interesting becomes kind of the new mimetic. Look, that's a possibility, right? And I would say that's what I watched happen with CoinMarketCap, right? I also looked at CoinMarketCap every day for, maybe checking the price of the third or fourth biggest coin, but it never really occurred to me that this was something to take seriously until it's like the long tail becomes valuable. And that's when CoinMarketCap became a, $500 million business, and, still the number one, crypto media site. So, yeah, very bullish on Bitcoin treasuries. Don't think the model is going to, it's not like this is the end all be all of what the crypto movement is aspiring to, but it's going to be big, right?
For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com.
As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions may apply. Do your own research.
What's everyone missing about this? So everybody's missing. The number. I think everyone's missing. I think people are expecting in the dozens, but not in the thousands. What else is everybody missing? What do you think? Because I feel like you have a thesis here that I think you're into something that people aren't paying attention to. And I want to know
if you think about it like this, right? Nobody who, I like to say, I've never met somebody who was happy that they sold their Bitcoin, right? And there's something really basic about just like a company owning Bitcoin in the same way that individuals do. And so the classic critique of these Bitcoin treasury companies is, oh, well, they're not very good companies, and they're not very, maybe they're not the best cream of the crop. And I would say, I watched a lot of people in 2013, 2014 get insanely rich, who necessarily didn't really provide that much of value to the cryptocurrency sector, right? They maybe were founders of projects that, failed or didn't provide something of value. Like you would probably have never heard of them. But they're multimillionaires. They live in, Puerto Rico. They're fabulously wealthy, and they provided to the space in terms of, just helping the space go through ideas and disproving those ideas. But we're very disproportionately rewarded, right? So I think that, you're just going to see a big capital unlock. There's just no regulatory barrier to large investors allocating, right? In the same way that there's not for MicroStrategy today. Like there isn't. That's why you see like the central banks of Switzerland like owns exposure to Master, right? Or the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia owns exposure to MSTR. So the reason for that is regulatory, right? Because you don't have things like the market structure bill in place in the United States, and it's not in place globally. That means that capital allocators aren't able to play in the crypto market. I mean, you can ask them like, would they actually want to do that? And sure, maybe your viewers would take that position. But let's just take the position that like until that bill passes, they can't. And so where does that capital flow? I think the Bitcoin treasury companies start to look really appealing, especially when you look at the track record of all of the companies and just how well their stock has performed. And again, if you look at the attributes of these stocks kind of generally, I would argue that they offer the retail public an experience that looks very similar to being on a CoinMarketCap, being on a Moonshot, in terms of offering, people who want to speculate. It replicates a lot of the basic components of that, right? So, somebody who's sitting on Moonshot and they're deciding whether they're going to buy, fart coin or poop coin, I don't think is really, providing that much to the space. But like, they're doing what they want with their money. This is a freedom movement.
Do you think it's the same? Is it the same person that's going to like? Where I see you going with this is a thesis that is very interesting, which is do we get an altcoin season? right? Or does all the capital flow
Yeah, I
to
think I've been
Treasury?
broadly pretty bearish on the alternative cryptocurrency space for a long time. I was net neutral on it, I would say, up until 2017. Maybe the folks in that movement would say I was pretty supportive. I did lead the conversation at CoinDesk to have the publication start covering Ethereum. I was the largest proponent of that and did have that come to pass. I broadly, I think at that point thought, experimentation was good. It was good to see a lot of projects. I would say I'm pretty dissatisfied with kind of the net result of that. Obviously, the market's still out on that, and there's plenty of people with alternative theses on that. But yeah, I would say that, broadly, I had a long conversation on the podcast with Ryan Selkis recently. He was my boss at CoinDesk, and I was part of a lot of conversations early on where he went to found Masari. Masari was kind of founded with a lot of these good intentions, right? It was this idea that there were going to be all these different types of monies on the internet. They were going to compete on features. So we needed all this categorization. We needed all this technology to kind of evaluate them. And yeah, I think that was well intentioned, and it was a good faith attempt. I don't begrudge the attempt. So I'm not one of those kind of Bitcoin maximalists who's, kind of thinks there's an ethical complaint with that. I'm just saying, after 10 years of data, it's, how far have we gotten against that goal? I would say probably not that far, right? A lot of these categorizations of cryptocurrencies haven't really held up. To me, there doesn't seem like a terribly large distinguishing factor. Like, if I asked you to name 3 large classes of cryptocurrencies, right? Is that something that like most people in the space have an answer to? And I don't think that's true, right? So I think the net result looks like the primary way that the crypto market is succeeding, and I think this is validated by the meme coin craze, is that it's speculation, right? Like that's what people want. They use the crypto market for speculation. It's fun. It's the casino. The crypto market has sort of leaned into this. And I think, with meme coins, unfortunately, like the cat's out of the bag, right? Like people know the game now. Retail knows the game. They know you have to be an insider. They know you have to dump on somebody else. And they're watching James Wynn get liquidated, and pumping his Moonpig bags. Like that's what the crypto space is, right? I think Dave Portnoy hit the nail on the head where he said, I'm a long-term hodler of, what was the name of the coin?
That he did?
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, so he said, I'm a long-term hodler of jail stool. That
was it.
He's like, I held it for 48 hours. I held it for a couple of days, right? Like that's what the altcoin market is. And I think that if you think about what Bitcoin treasury companies provide, it's like the market starts to look a lot like that. But, and here's the but, right? As I said about, some of the investors in the space, everybody who I've known who's held Bitcoin has done well financially. And so from that simple insight, why wouldn't that apply to companies as well, right? So if every company that holds Bitcoin, you would expect them to do as well as Bitcoin, then you don't have to be the best company. You don't have to be the smartest person. You just have to own some Bitcoin, right? And I think that's a really powerful idea, that companies can get ahead in the same way that individuals can. I think Saylor uses a lot of like highfalutin language to kind of get his points across, but I think this one is actually really profound. It's just that, you as an individual can benefit from Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation and to kind of grow your own, wealth. And companies can do that. And it protects, it protects the, bad companies as well as great companies, right? And MicroStrategy's case, right? Maybe they're a great company and Bitcoin is helping them out, but you might get companies like a great example would be Tahini's in Canada, right? People might not remember them from the 2021 cycle, but they're a small falafel chain in Canada that put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, has since expanded to 10 or 15 locations. And, are they McDonald's? No, but Bitcoin has, dramatically helped their business and helped them expand, whereas their competitors, weren't able to, right? So that's sometimes this goes back to the original theme where I started. It's, I think a lot of times in the crypto market, you go back to the early ideas, like stablecoins weren't taken seriously. NFTs weren't taken seriously. Bitcoin treasury companies are one of those ideas that's going from being an also-ran, something that no one took seriously. And that's why I think it's going to be so big, because I think that there's so many advantages to that market right now.
For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, With the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com.
As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions may apply. Do your own research.
And I think that you directionally you're correct for sure, right? Like, is there thousands of companies? You don't know, I don't know, but like directionally you are for sure correct. This is the topic of the week, the topic of the month. Everybody's talking about it, and it is going to bring new flows in new jurisdictions that, quite frankly, don't have access to Bitcoin or don't have the exposure. And there's a lot of people waiting on the sidelines and all that. And I think we all go ahead.
One note on that, I would say like a lot of people are really underestimating too, like how little access there is. So that's what Japan with MetaPlanet really proved, right? So with MetaPlanet in Japan, it wasn't really just that the company bought Bitcoin and became a high performing stock. It was that the currency also had a ton of challenges, like the Japan currency is down. That also if you bought Bitcoin and actually held it versus buying the stock, there was profound tax advantages. So basically,
it's like a 30% difference.
Right, exactly. And so these are kind of the arbitrage opportunities that I think those companies are going to hit. And there are going to be markets, maybe it's like the Middle East, you look at the list of capital markets, right? So maybe it's not even just the US, but capital markets, 3 through 10, out in just the world's a big place, right? Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, like all these places, right? They all have capital markets, right? And this is why I think people, this is why I'm trying to kind of get out there and say, like, this is a big idea. I think it's going to get really big. I think this could be the cycle defining idea because it has a lot of these attributes where, this could really expand. And you may balk at the idea that there'd be thousands of them, but right now there's 200 of them. So to get to 1,000, it just has to 5x, right?
Is there 200 already? Wow, I did not know there was that many already.
It's gone up pretty considerably in the last 2 months. And this is like kind of the ramping that you usually see on kind of like something that's very exponential. I'll give you an anecdotal example. There's probably like 10 companies in Japan that have followed MetaPlanet. Everything from like an entertainment company called Beat Holdings to, there's a mid-level kind of like fashion retailer.
Do we need this many like long term? Like now, yeah, I get it. It's an opportunity, and if you're sitting there and you're watching Sailor, you're thinking, hey, why wouldn't I go do this? I could.
Well, now you're asking me if I think this idea provides anything to the space, which is a different question. So, the thing here is that companies are going to own Bitcoin in the same way that individuals do. And yes, in the long term, if you believe that, we're going to a world where, Bitcoin is the store of value, like every company would own Bitcoin. So that's why this idea is directionally, I think, going to get very big. Sure. Is it going to become super distorted and like every bubble is going to completely blow up? Sure. Right. The ICO bubble started with the best of intentions. I remember being on the call with the Consensus team when they were launching the Gnosis ICO in January of 2017, and they had all these legal guidelines, and it was, going to be very above board, and everybody was there was gonna be no front running and no cheating, and it was a very
it's crazy to think that even happened, right? Because
right, really, but you're where you're like, for people who remember the ICO boom, I don't know how deep your folks go, but this is Tezos in April of 2017. You've got 7 months till Justin Sun, and so there's a Justin Sun of the Bitcoin Treasury movement, at the end of the line, but you're gonna rip through, I think, hundreds and hundreds of companies until then. It just, again, like, think about the idea, think of the qualities that it has. And again, I'm not saying that like, this is transformative and this is the end all be all of the Bitcoin and crypto movement. I'm actually just putting that aside for a second. I think this is where a lot of the hype and euphoria is going to be. And these second and third wave companies, they're probably going to over debt, over leverage. I think Max Kaiser's done a great job of, getting in front of this and saying, not every company is going to be MicroStrategy in the same way that not every ICO is Ethereum. In fact, 99% of them were not. But we're headed in that direction. I just think that it's a message that I think I'd like the crypto folks to hear, because I think, it's a market within Bitcoin that has a lot of the attributes of the markets that I think the crypto community finds interesting. And I, part of the reason I'm over at Blockworks kind of working on this podcast with them is that, I would like, the crypto folks, to, come with us on the journey towards hyper Bitcoinization, right? I don't see the crypto world as, somebody that I want to lose, right, in this transition. There's a lot of ways to kind of, get Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's just monetizing at a crazy rate, right? So if you're in crypto and you're heavily exposed to crypto, you should probably think about getting some Bitcoin. Would I
For
recommend
sure.
a Bitcoin
For
treasury
sure.
company? Maybe not, but maybe that's an opportunity that gets you in the door.
Yeah, I mean, we had a very interesting conversation with like I think that there's what's interesting about what you're saying is you're talking about like crypto natives and
Hmm.
our listeners. And for them, I mean, look, everybody listening, I'll say this every day. If you are an investor in crypto, you are not holding Bitcoin. Stop what you're doing right now. Stop listening to this podcast and go move some of your assets into Bitcoin, right? Like there is no
Great.
reason, right? Like why it shouldn't
And
be
trying
a
to get to
large.
one Bitcoin before it just, before that.
Exactly. Yeah. For sure. Fully buy into that. Right. I'm going to leave the altcoin separate for a sec because otherwise you and I are going to start debating on that, and I don't necessarily want to go down that path. Everybody knows my thoughts, so I want to more focus on your thoughts.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing to me is okay. So we're going to get all these new crypto or new Bitcoin treasury companies, right? And I think it's important to say that there's different types of Bitcoin treasury companies. There is companies that have a sustainable revenue, profitable, and then they put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Okay, there's that type. And then there's the Michael Saylor playbook, which is we don't have another company. I mean, yeah, they have a tech company, but they basically pushed it to the
I would
side.
argue that MicroStrategy fits the first one, but I'd say, like, to your point, like what you're about to see is like actually a very large innovation on the model, right? So what people are,
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
and this
exactly.
is what you saw
Which
with
is going, yeah,
with 21, Jack Mallers, kind of going from Strike to 21 Capital, and putting this out. Like, his thesis is that 21 is going to be an operating company that releases Bitcoin products and then makes money on the products and invest that in Bitcoin, right? But you're going to see all stripes, right? And that's kind of the thing here is Strive would be an example of Vivek Ramaswamy's group. They're going to go out and acquire companies that are cash flow positive. So they're raising money. They're going to buy those companies, and then they're going to put the cash flows from those companies into Bitcoin, right? So that's already three different models, right? With MicroStrategy, it's they have an incumbent business. They rolled over the profits to that into Bitcoin. Now they're using debt and corporate market structure to, supersize that. 21 wants to be an operating business and also, proxy for their capital investors. And then, in terms of, the third model of acquiring companies, right? And you're just going to see every different variation of that, and I think that that's one of the things that's going to really, I think, kick this model off. And again, I think sorry.
Is this the biggest driver of inflows that you see for Bitcoin
I
in
don't
this
see
year?
anything else in the market currently, and I would love to hear your counterpoint if there, because I see like crypto industry beyond Bitcoin as like particularly bereft of ideas at the moment. There was always, we would joke even in Bitcoin that, oh, if NFTs fail, you still got DeFi, if you still got DeFi, you've got identity, and there always felt like this laundry list of DPIN, like other there felt like this long list of acronyms that, like, the crypto industry could kind of go to and just kind of roll out the next thing. And with meme coins, again, I really do feel like it's a bit of an existential, like, end of the line.
So you don't think meme coins last? See, I think meme coins last because I think people love to gamble, and they love to gamble on attention. And why not be able to gamble on attention long term? I think right now, don't get me wrong, everything that you said earlier around the bad actors and the way that it is being done is going to get washed out. But I think long term that I think meme coins stick in a different. I don't think we're going to call them meme coins. I think it's going to be a different type of format. But speculating on attention, I don't think goes anywhere, because why wouldn't?
Well, I think Dogecoin has lasted, right? Like, so, I was there for the early innings of Dogecoin and Jackson Palmer and kind of the original founding of the crew. But I think I like to say that we really don't know much about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, even after all these years, right? This is still an experiment. We're still learning things.
Yeah,
and,
that's a good point. It is still an experiment, but not Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin's an experiment. Everything else.
One of the things that I like to say, if you'll let me set it up, is that, I think we know Bitcoin is different and decentralized, and we know that it's money, and we know that it works. That's like kind of one. And then we know that every other cryptocurrency, no matter how terrible it is, has some, it's useful as you could transfer value with it. So even the worst, you could go down to the bottom page of CoinMarketCap, you could put $100 into Fartcoin 2200, and I could send that to you wherever you are right now. So there's like a minimum viable utility to any cryptocurrency. And even as myself as a Bitcoin maximalist, I will freely admit that this is an unsolved paradox. There's a minimum value to any cryptocurrency. The question is, well, what is that worth, right? There was this idea in Silicon Valley, I think, early on that, and this really kind of was the 2017 era thesis, right? Is that they saw kind of networks like Facebook and Uber as sort of, networks that were given value by the participants, and essentially they saw cryptocurrencies as a way to distribute that value more equitably. I don't think that thesis has really played out. I don't think you can say that like cryptocurrencies are, their valuations represent their network effects. Like, I think that's a bit of an overstatement. Again, I think you look at a lot of these coins, a huge percentage of the supply is liquid. They're very thinly traded, but I concede that they work on some microscopic level. I just don't know where that goes. And I think that I look at the Dave Portnoy,
experiment.
Well, I see that as beautiful. I actually thought that was a joyous moment, because I'm sort of like, okay, well, this is just obviously, and pumped up fun as well, right? This is what the crypto system optimizes for. Like, this is when you actually turn attention into a zero sum game, and you actually force people, because this is all about, what does Bitcoin do? It allows you to kind of put your money somewhere and preserve it over time. And so if, crypto becomes a hot potato game where you're constantly ripping, going through your capital. Like, one of the moments where I really fell out of love with crypto was during DeFi summer, where I went to bed and then I was like, oh, like, I'm actually like afraid to go to bed because like I don't know what like the actual value of my portfolio is going to be in the morning. And you're like, how does that scale? It's like, you're like, how is that a real, like, what's the utility here? Like, and then this was, this is a deep cut. You remember Andre Cronje, like when he was like in his like sequence of like launching coins that like, were really hot. I don't even know if he's still relevant anymore, but this is a developer. He had a sequence of coins where essentially, everybody was so high on this guy that he eventually just like launched a GitHub page that had no coin. He went to sleep and he woke up and found that people had scraped the code and launched it, and then just deployed it without him knowing about it, and then run up the price, and it had already dumped in the time that like he discovered it. And then, so this is where I think like, you have to think about it. It's like, okay, well, cryptocurrencies, like, sure, you could value everything in the world with a token. That's technologically possible, but then there's the idea of like you living in that world and like how that would actually, what that would actually be like. And again, like from my moment as an end user, after being here for like 12 years, it's like I don't really use any crypto products outside of Bitcoin. I've used stablecoins for a few things. Experiment with this stuff, but the idea that you like the large scale consumer public, would want to live in a state where they're like constantly in fear of their their value depreciating, on like a minute to hour level, just like how could that possibly scale? And I think like Pump Fun kind of showed that was sort of to me it felt like the end of the line. It was sort of like, okay, well, this is actually what that system prioritizes, because when you actually do turn everything into a coin, this is the whole Coinbase thing, coin it. Everything is a zero sum speculative game where you're trying to get, advantage over someone else. And the thing that's nice about Bitcoin, and maybe this ties in the treasury companies, is that's pretty absent, right? Like, I know that I know that most people in Bitcoin are not going to sell their Bitcoin. I know that some of these companies are going to raise a lot of Bitcoin and puke out these Bitcoin, but I know that's not really going to affect me, like as a hodler, right? Like, and I don't have the anxiety of that. And part of what Bitcoin I think is solving for is the anxiety of this over financialized system, where the person who's just living their life and trying to save has to become this sophisticated technical gambler, like just to pay for their house and car and things. And I see crypto as sort of exacerbating the stuff. And so when I see, folks like who I used to kind of be at Bitcoin meetups or Bitcoin, events with, like, maybe like a Brian Armstrong, like talking about like hyper financialization of, media and art and things like that, that's not something that I'm interested in building, nor do I think we'll have a
yeah. I mean, I think that like you bring up an interesting point, which is a conversation that I have had a little bit recently, not a ton, but which is, will we ever get a mass adopted crypto app? Like, will we ever have a chat GPT of crypto? We used to think that, right? We used to think, yeah, we're going to come up with a crypto app and everybody's going to come in and use it. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to have that anymore. I do believe that a lot of people will use blockchain when they're doing various forms of financial transactions and they won't even know in the long term. And I do believe very much in a lot of the ability of blockchain to bring better infrastructure to our current financial markets, such as the
Yeah.
NASDAQ, right?
Well,
Great
actually,
stock exchange.
I'll throw you a bone here in terms of like where I think the crypto networks are going to be interesting with the treasury companies, and there's going to be an interesting overlap here that people haven't really noticed. I think is that the tokenized stocks, right? So you're looking at a lot of the crypto exchanges are going to get into tokenized stocks, right? So they're going to be able to take an Apple share and a Tesla share, run it on a stablecoin rail, and then that means that someone in Africa or someone in El Salvador could buy access to MicroStrategy. Okay, so well now who's the perfect vehicle for these tokenized stocks? I would argue the Bitcoin treasury companies are actually the prime candidate, and I think you could actually see an interesting merger there, where these kind of worlds combined, where you actually do see Bitcoin treasury companies tokenized moving on crypto rails, right? I think like the stablecoin. I think stablecoins are so you're saying like nobody's used crypto, like stablecoins are fast becoming and will become.
Yes. Yeah, I just mean like one killer app, killer use case for sure. Stablecoins definitely like it's runaway, right? Like it's still
Right,
so
you
early.
mean sort of in like the old spirit where with, and I remember this from the 17 era where it was like somebody was going to make an Uber or Facebook, like some
That's what I mean.
kind of crazy concoction,
like a mass,
right.
exactly, a massively adopted app that is used by everybody that uses crypto. And whether it was going to be ticketing or art or identity or I don't know, I'm with you that I don't know.
There was like thousands of possibilities, and I would argue
Yeah.
that like people who have spent a long time in crypto, you should like there's a winnowing of that field, right? Like we've kind of watched it go because look, I was in 2015. I remember being at the Bitcoin conference in Chicago, and Vitalik got up there on a whiteboard, and he was like, "You're gonna have decentralized this and this and this," and he had his little quadrants, and he's like, "You're gonna have decentralized messaging, and you're gonna have decentralized websites, and you're gonna have decentralized domains," and he had this whole little checkerboard thing, and there was this feeling that there was like this infinite amount of possibilities that I would say I think I've watched the market sort of invalidate. So a good friend of mine, Ryan Selkis, I think I mentioned I did a podcast with him. I mean, he thinks that regulation is the barrier to that, and that with regulation you'll see that unlock. I'm not super confident in that, but I'm willing to be wrong. Maybe it is just regulation that needs to be unlocked. But I look at the amount of ideas, right? Like how many ideas are still on the board. Like even Meltem Demers gave a really great speech at Digital Asset Summit, talking about compute and like, we've got to find a way to bring crypto to compute. And I'm sort of like, okay, well, what's the core idea here? Does this mean like, what are you searching for? Because at the end of the day, it's like computers are proof of work is like, you're just using energy on computers. I also used to like that idea. I used to think that like maybe there would be different computing resources and maybe those could be kind of tokenized in the different types of currencies, but we haven't seen that. I don't know. Again, I like to say that people who aren't familiar with are more familiar with the more aggressive forms of Bitcoin maximalism. I would just say like I came to Bitcoin maximalism through like originally being open to most ideas, and then just like over a decade or so, just seeing most of these things not play out, and that's pretty normal, right? Like that's normal in most industries, and I think that what you're seeing is essentially it took 30 years from Bitcoin, for people had the ideas for digital cash back in the 1980s, right?
Oh yeah, there was how many Bitcoins before there was Bitcoins, right? There was probably like 4 or 5 that failed.
Right. So is there
cryptography?
There's something that's 30 years down the pike on crypto where it clicks and something happens? Like I'm not going to discount that that's a possibility. I'm just my observation here is seeing kind of these waves of cycles where everything was going to kind of be a crypto app, and then everything was going to be tokenized, and then the banks were going to run everything, and then the banks didn't run anything, and Bitcoin has just endured and kind of gone up over time in response to that. So yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I'm always
and I think you really need to separate Bitcoin from the rest of crypto now, right? Like I mean, in a way, it always has been Bitcoin and altcoins, but I think that everybody, and I think people in crypto understand that, right? Bitcoin is
That's
an
been a
asset
recent change.
all on its own.
I feel like since 2021, there's been a big change in that. And that's something that I've really felt and why I've wanted to kind of have more conversations with people in the crypto space, because I feel like there used to be a lot of adversarialness. And I think a lot of that was from the crypto companies who really did see themselves as displacing Bitcoin. And I think now that that has gone away, I'm pretty pro, the idea that other cryptocurrency networks might try to, bring their technology to Bitcoin in some way. I don't think they're guaranteed for that to work, but if I was them, I would be thinking about that, right? And I think you've seen some Justin Sins or Charles Hoskinson start to ideate, what would my platform look like if it was built on Bitcoin? Again, I take the directional approach of just at this point, I expect Bitcoin to be the settlement layer for sort of everything, and so I expect everything to come to Bitcoin, whether that's companies or alts, kind of layer twos on Bitcoin. It just makes sense, right? Because as Bitcoin goes up in value, it's like the incentives to get Bitcoin just become so much bigger. And now you're watching like nations get pulled in, and the network effect is just running away, right? I mean, again, it's, I wrote my first article when Bitcoin was $50, in like my lifetime, I've seen, I could have for what would have cost me like a couple meals, I could have bought years worth of my life. That's just staggering amount of growth. Right. I at Bitcoin Vegas, I did a fireside with Chin Wang, founder of F2 Pool, who's, grew up in Western China, poor, put himself through school, like dropped out, and then now is like, he's paying for his own personal like spacecraft, like into the Earth's orbit. He's the first human
because of Bitcoin.
Because he was a big early Bitcoin miner, right? Like, because he's a billionaire, a self-made billionaire from Western China, who now is helping Elon with space exploration, funding it, and then piloting missions. And that's just like, it's just what an incredible story. Like, right? Like what an insane thing to happen to someone. I was talking with him and I was joking and I was like, if you lived 100 lives, even if you lived 1,000 lives, like I was like, you're like on the high score. It's like, how do you top that? It's like if I'm Chin Wang, it's like, I don't want there to be any alternative realities. Like, this is just the one, it's like you got your high score. And so yeah.
So let me ask you this, Rizzo. Last question before we wrap up here, because my producer always yells at me when I go over 40 minutes, which I do every single episode. So here we are again. Attention goes down steep, but it's just so fun to talk with educated and very intelligent people like yourself. Talking about Bitcoin, we have the Bitcoin Treasury company explosion that's going to happen. I buy in. It's going to happen over the course of next few months, particularly with market structure bill, which you think August roughly.
Well, we'll see, right? As we speak, Elon and the Donald are look like they're having a bit of a divorce, right? So who knows in Washington, right? I personally don't put that much faith in the democratic governance system of the United States of America. I think it is it's a hard thing to wager a bet on.
Okay, so let's not go down that path. Let me position it as this, that the Bitcoin Treasury company strategy is going to grow. It's going to bring new flows. A lot of people around the world in jurisdictions don't currently have access, all these things. It's going to bring new flows into Bitcoin. As a result of that, Bitcoin is going to have most likely great price action throughout the rest of the year. Whatever happens in macro and whatever Trump does aside, because I can't predict that. My question to you is, where does it go? Is there a risk of this bubble bursting in a significant way?
Yeah,
Do you see Bitcoin? The reason I'm asking is I just did an interview with Mark Yusko earlier this morning, actually, and he was talking about how he still believes that there could be a Bitcoin winter, similar to past Bitcoin winters, and that's what I can't decide. Like, I think we will get pullbacks. Look, Bitcoin's a volatile asset; it's still relatively. It's a growing asset, but it's not gold. It's not $20 trillion asset. So there's still going to be volatility. Do you think that we're ever going to see the pullbacks that we've seen in the past, the winters? Actually, I wouldn't even say pullback, the winters that we've seen in the past, or do you think Bitcoin has graduated beyond that?
I think there's always winters, right? And there's winters because just the natural market sentiment of people is to get, over exuberant, and then to hit some fever pitch. And yeah, there will be some points, whether it's 6 months or a year from now, where Bitcoin is, euphoric. It's at some crazy all-time high. And, look at the historical pattern. I think in 2013, it's like an 83% drawdown. 2017 is like a 79% drawdown. And 2021 is like a 73% drawdown. So let's just assume the historical curve, right? Let's just say we get a 60% drawdown, or a 50% drawdown. Well, what does that look like? Well, in an environment where like you have tons of companies that own Bitcoin and are over leveraged with debt in order to buy them, and you have governments that are owning Bitcoin and have spent money to acquire that. I think that looks pretty serious. But yeah, I don't know. I think that Bitcoin is crashing to infinity, right? It's going up and the little crashes. Again, it's like the crashes of yesteryear are just like almost comical now, right? I mean, I panic sold all my Bitcoin in the 2013 China ban, from dropped from $1,000 to $600 overnight. I remember going to dinner, I lost 40% of my money, and that's but at this point, like during this conversation, the price could have gone down $400, and like neither of us would have cared, right? And so that's just a very, that's just the thing about Bitcoin, right? We'll see these market corrections, of course, because that's just what always happens. I don't think there's anything different about humans. Look, it's the top when everybody is saying this time is different. Like that's the top. When everybody's saying this time is different, like that's the top. Every top that I've seen, you go back and you look at the indicators. I like to post on Reddit. I kind of, do my daily posts of like, things that happened in the past. And one of my favorite is like, the top indicators. It's like Jimmy Fallon with, Paris Hilton, and they have their little $1 million NFTs. Oh, here's Katy Perry, and like she's showing off her like crypto.
Steve Aoki is getting in there, and
right.
The list goes on.
Yeah, you look at the, you look back and you're like, oh, like even myself, right? I remember in December, because I think we've gone up a little bit since December, but I remember earlier this year being like, man, I was at Michael Saylor's house hosting a live TV event, and I was like, how the hell did I not sell some Bitcoin? Like, what an idiot!
Right. That is such a top signal. That is such a top signal.
This guy's yacht, and he's got 100-foot screens playing memes of himself, like as like from the movie 300, and I'm looking, I'm like how, like, man, I'm an idiot. Like I've seen so much, it's like I've seen so much over these years, and I'm sitting in it, and I'm like, that you couldn't tell that was a top, you idiot. Like it's like now, so this is my future self going back to my past self being like, what the hell is wrong? Like seriously, you're watching like people eat lobster tails and just like walk around with just like fists of prime steak, and you're just like, no, you just couldn't call that a top, could you? You just like had to you were
and it's very hard to call it a top because you're a genius in that moment, and
I remember
you're there and you're special.
Like, yep, I was like, it's happening now. I was like, here we go. And it's just
exactly.
Bitcoin loves to do that. But yeah, I don't know, man. As I'd say, I've gone on, and it's my new prediction. Well, I'd say Trump is the new top. So every time you see Trump do something, so the conference, top, Trump was there. Meme coin dinner, top, Trump was there. Inauguration, Trump was there, top. Trump's the new top. In the same way that Saylor and Bukele were the top in the 21 cycle, Trump's the new top. So that's why I'll buttress the end of this with saying, this goes back to my new all-time high before market structure. I think Trump's the new top, So we'll hope he buys the top in the same way his predecessors did, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, so stay tuned in, everybody, because it's an ever-changing world in crypto and in Bitcoin. And if you're not paying attention, things happen fast. And if you don't want to pay attention, the big take that I have from all of this, and the thing I keep saying to not just people in crypto, but more people outside of crypto too, is like, if you don't want to pay attention, just buy Bitcoin. Then you don't have to pay attention.
Well, our number one export is entertainment as well,
So keep listening to the Milk Road Show and check out Supply Chalk if you like Rizzo, because he's got a great show over on Blockworks. Before we wrap, I got to remind you guys all that none of today was investment advice. I'm not your financial advisor. Rizzo is not your financial advisor. You should only invest what you're prepared to lose. You should always take time to think before you make investments. Rizzo, thanks so much again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jay.